Hi everyone, and welcome to the first episode of That's My Drink. So it's a little series of videos I'll be putting together to show you how to make cocktails, but not just following recipes I've made. This will be showing you how to make homemade ingredients and then to use these ingredients in your own recipes. It's not really just aimed at bartenders, it's been aimed at everyone and really break down every little aspect of homemade cocktails. In this first episode I'm going to address what you need to have at home and a basic understanding of cocktails. And like any good science experiment tells us, we need to get our equipment and ingredients together first. Asking the question, what do I need to make cocktails, is a bit like asking like a chef, what do you need to cook, without knowing the type of cuisine or the dish you're thinking of preparing. You can't give a definitive list. So what I'm going to do is attempt to give you an overall guideline of some things you should have in and around your house so you can make your own cocktails. I broke these down to 3 key sections, which is booze, modifiers and equipment. Most cocktail books will tell you to have a massive range of bottles, and this can be really expensive outlay, especially if you're just starting out. The glory of making your own homemade cocktails is that you're generally making them for yourself, so you only really have to cater to your own likes. So buy things you know you're going to drink, or buy things you know you're going to like. If you only really like gin, only stock gin, but make sure you've got 1 or 2 different types of it, different flavour profiles, because then you can experiment a bit more with your cocktails. If you're like me and fancy a bit more experimentation and want to have a play around with a few more different types of spirit, then I'd recommend having 3 different types to start with. This really keeps your finance sort of side of it in check a bit more. We're still having plenty of time to play. I always try to have at least 1 rum, 1 whiskey, vodka, gin and an agave based spirit. The agave is not really necessary, but I absolutely love it, so I will always have 1 or 2 bottles of that knocking around. If you pick any 3 of those, the amount of classic cocktails you can make and the amount of experimentation you can do is great. The one thing I would say when it comes to buying spirits, these are going to cost between £25 to £40 a bottle for anything that's of good quality, and they can cost a lot more. Do your research first. Ask for recommendations, read up on tasting notes, and just make sure you're informed before you make the purchase. The second section is modifiers. Now, I use this as a blanket name for anything that doesn't have any alcohol content. So I'm talking juices, sugars, fizzy mixers, citrus, all that kind of stuff, where it's a vital part of the cocktail, but it's more for a flavour and a balancing act. When it comes to juices and citrus and stuff like that, fresh is best. A golden rule is that good ingredients equals good cocktails. If you haven't got the balance right, of course, it might not taste nice, but if you've got a really well-balanced cocktail, but it's made with subpar ingredients, it won't taste as good as a really balanced cocktail made with really good quality ingredients. As for sugars, you can use just spoonfuls of granulated sugar, but I would recommend making them into syrups, which I'll show you how to make one of those now. So, making your own sugar syrup at home. Really straightforward and easy. What I'd suggest you invest in first is a set of scales like this. You've got a couple of degrees of precision there. This will be quite useful when we get further into making more complex ingredients, where we're using a fraction of a gram of some ingredients. What I'd then do is place your vessel you're going to be making your sugar syrup in on the scales, reset to 0. Then for now, we will say the type of sugar doesn't make a difference, or doesn't matter for basic sugar syrup. It does matter. We'll go into more details on that next week, but whatever sugar you got in the house will do for now. You're just starting out making your first sugar syrup or first homemade cocktails. Most sugar syrups I make will be on a 2-to-1 ratio. So that just means for every 1 gram of water, I'm putting 2 grams of sugar. So I'm going to weigh out 100 grams of Demerara sugar. There we go. And then 0 that off again. Reset to 0. And then just boiled my kettle. And I'm going to do 50 grams of water. Not 50 mils, 50 grams. Every time I mention a ratio, unless I state otherwise, I am using it by weight, not by volume. When we get further in and you see some more viscous liquids, their volume and weight will be slightly different. We'll always go off weight. So 50 grams of water. Pour it slowly, because obviously it's very difficult to stop bang on the mill. The glorious thing about doing these at home and only making for yourself is you don't have to be overly accurate. If you've got 105 grams of sugar and 48 grams of water, that's fine. That'll be roughly a 2-to-1 syrup. Now, while it's still hot, just give it a stir. Then I've got a nice little empty bottle here. Keep hold of from now on, any sort of glass bottles that you use, wash them out, keep hold of them, they'll be very useful. I've also got a funnel, very good investment for someone like myself who does tend to make a bit of a mess. And then just pour your newly made syrup into your bottle. Now that's not made a great deal there. 2-to-1 syrup like that will make probably just around 100 millilitres of syrup. It's not a great deal, but you can always scale those up. I'll always give you recipes for homemade ingredients in a ratio, so then you can just make up as much as you've got. The final section of things that I would say you should really have in your house is equipment. Now, if you have a nice cocktail shaker, a jigger for measuring, bar spoon, strainers, and a mixing glass, perfect. You'll be able to make all sorts of cocktails and look really cool whilst doing it. But not everyone has this equipment readily available, and it's not necessarily important to have all the official gear straight away. Instead of a jigger, you can use a protein shaker. Instead of a jigger measure, you can use a measuring cup or like an egg cup or something along those lines. These can be easily replaced by a knife or anything that will hold ice back or swirl a liquid around, and this easily replaced by a pint glass. So if you want to make your own cocktails at home and you're not necessarily thinking about, maybe recording yourself making them or even just want to look cool in front of your friends, if you're not fussed by any of that, just use stuff you got around the house. The one thing I would suggest in investing in straight away is some proper ice cube trays. Do not buy party ice. Everything about it's horrible. It's really poor quality, which I'll go into detail why in another video on ice. Just trust me at this moment, party ice is terrible. And also they come in them horrible plastic bags, which are single use, can't be recycled, you have to throw them in landfill. These, however, make really nice sized ice cubes. There's nothing wrong with them, no deformities, and you can use them again and again and again. And they're really easy to get out. You just push the bottoms and all the ice cubes come out. Now you've got everything together to make cocktails. You really need to understand what makes a nice cocktail. Go through the next 4 stages and refer back to classic cocktails as a way of making it easier to understand. I would recommend looking at some classic cocktails as well before you make your own. Not to try and steal ideas, but to see the ratios of things that they're using. So what is balance? Balance is when none of the components of a cocktail are particularly overbearing. They're just all helping each other bring out the best in each other. So balance is really sort of defined by 4 broad areas. There are other things to worry about when making a cocktail, but these are good to start with. It's sweet, sour, long, and strong. And they kind of work in tandem with each other into 2 different pairs. I'll start with sweet and sour first because that's the easiest one to understand, I think. I'm going to refer everything back to a daiquiri for the time being. So sweet and sour in a daiquiri, you've got your sugar syrup and your lime juice. Now, a daiquiri is a sour style cocktail, so you do want a bit more lime to come through. But if you have too much lime, you're going to get that sort of wincing effect. Those adverts of people eating Haribo Tangfastics where they're putting all the funny faces. That's what you'll make people do if you've got too much lime in there. And that's not an enjoyable experience, contrary to what Haribo will say. What you do is you then have the sugar syrup there, which will then bring it into check, as it were. And so you've got that lip-smacking acidity that makes people want to have another mouthful of a daiquiri, but not too much. That makes it not enjoyable to drink. The same the other way around. I said daiquiri is a sour style of cocktail, so you don't want too much sugar in there. You still want it to be acidic. So that's that balancing act you've got to get there. And once you've got that ratio right, you can then apply it to the cocktail. So long and strong really have the same kind of relationship that what sweet and sour do. With the daiquiri again, the strong component is your rum. Because of the high ABV and the concentration of flavour is another thing to take into consideration. And the long is the lime sugar, no alcohol content, and not necessarily the higher concentration of flavour. It's not really what you're focusing on. Daiquiri being a rum cocktail, you really want the rum to come to the fore. And that's the problem if you get the ratio out. If you put too much lime and sugar in there, the characteristics of that rum will be lost. Whereas you want the rum to come forward. It's a rum-based cocktail. You're showcasing this rum, so you really want it to be quite at the forefront. But because of the ABV, if you put too much rum in it, people may not enjoy drinking it. So that's another sort of relationship you've got to really be careful of. Sweet and sour for that wincing effect or the style of drink that you're trying to create, and then the long and strong to make sure you're not shoving too much alcohol in it and make people dislike the cocktail, or getting the alcohol lost and making sort of not able to pick it out in there. So it seems simple, doesn't it? Sweet, sour, long and strong. Quite easy to understand, just play them off each other. It would only be really simple if every ingredient was just one of those. Sometimes they're a combination of them, sometimes I've got other things added in there like spice and bitterness. So the main bit of advice I can give you right now is to, when you're making a cocktail and you want to use a certain ingredient, you decided on that ingredient, know what it tastes like, know what it brings to the cocktail, and then think, okay, but if I use this much of it, that one element might be a bit too much. So what can I do to balance it out, bring it into check? Going on to the long and strong, going a bit more detail on it, if you've got booze and the only way to balance it out is to use a non-alcoholic ingredient, how do things like martinis and old fashions work? They're pretty much entirely high-strength booze, save for maybe in the old fashions case a dash of sugar, or in the martinis case you've got a slightly lower ABV vermouth going into it. And this is where your choice of technique really comes into play. So when you stir a cocktail, it takes a minute for it to cool down to the right temperature, whereas when you shake it, it only takes about 10 seconds. Now they're getting down to the same temperature, but because of the amount of time taken, you get more dilution in a stirred cocktail. And that's where you get your long aspect for these cocktails. The dilution, the water that's going into the drink, balances the alcohol out without taking away from the flavour of the alcohol. So you're really showcasing that one bit, but you're not giving someone neat 45-50% alcohol you probably use in those two cocktails. So that's really an overview of what you need at home and how to balance a cocktail. Don't worry if there's some bits, you've got some questions on some of these bits, and I don't think I went quite into enough detail on them, because each of these 4 aspects of balancing cocktails are actually what I'm going to focus on next, starting with sweet on my next video, which I'll show you how to make in more detail sugar syrups and flavoured sugar syrups and how to use these to your advantage in cocktails, and what else sugar and sweetness brings to a cocktail other than just the sweetness. Thanks guys, see you next time.